7 men drove into the Arizona forest after work. 6 came back. And when those 6 men tried to explain what had happened to their missing coworker, Travis Walton, they told police that a glowing object had blasted him with a beam of light. Then when they returned to help him, he was gone. Naturally, police suspected a murder because 6 men coming home without the 7th guy and a beaming UFO is not exactly a normal explanation. But then 5 members of the crew passed polygraph examinations, and several days after Travis disappeared, he suddenly came back. So today we're looking at the evidence that has kept people believing this story for 50 years. The details, skeptics say, point to an elaborate hoax, and the most famous part of Travis's story that Hollywood completely changed. Welcome to Stay Strange with Jen. Let's get into it. The story begins on November 5th, 1975 in the Apache Sitgreaves National Forest in Arizona. Travis Walton was 22 years old and he was working as part of a 7-man logging crew. The crew had spent the whole day clearing out trees, and that evening they piled into their truck and started heading home. It was already getting dark. They were traveling through a remote section of forest when they noticed a strange glow through the trees ahead of them. First, they weren't sure what they were looking at, but as the truck moved closer, the men claimed they could see a large glowing disc-shaped object hovering in the clearing. And Travis, he got out of the truck, which, I'm sorry, apparently this is the wrong answer. But if I've spent my entire life wondering whether UFOs are real, and then one is suddenly floating directly in front of me, I'm at least seriously considering getting out of the truck. I'm not saying it's a smart decision. Clearly, based on how this story continues, it was not a smart decision. But I understand the curiosity. Then the object reportedly started making noise, and suddenly a bright blue-green beam of light struck Travis. Men claim the force of it threw him backward through the air. He hit the ground and stopped moving. Now, imagine being inside that truck. One second, your coworker is walking toward this strange object. The next second, a beam shoots out of it, throws him through the air, and he is lying motionless on the ground. The driver, Mike Rogers, panicked. He hit the gas, and the crew fled. Yes, they left Travis underneath the UFO, which is objectively terrible. But I also have absolutely no idea what my nervous system would do if I watched my friend get thrown through the air by a beam of light. I would like to believe I would immediately jump out of the truck and run toward him, but I cannot promise that. The crew drove some distance away before Rogers stopped, and to their account, the initial panic began wearing off and they realized that they could not leave Travis behind. So they turned back around and went back. When they reached the clearing, the glowing object was gone, and so was Travis. They searched the area, they called his name, they looked through the woods, nothing. No Travis. Eventually, the crew realized they had to contact authorities. And now these 6 men had a completely different. They had to explain why they had come home from work without Travis Walton. And their explanation was aliens. The crew contacted law enforcement and told them what they claimed had happened. They had seen a glowing object in the forest. Travis approached it. The beam struck him. They panicked and drove away. And when they returned, both Travis and the object were gone. Now you have to put yourself in the police officer's position here. 6 men returned from work without the 7th guy. The missing man was last seen with them. And when you ask what happened, they tell you a flying saucer did it. Come on. You are investigating a murder. You're not calling standard extraterrestrial backup. Law enforcement treated Travis's disappearance as possible foul play. Had there been a fight? Was there an accident? Had one of the men hurt him? Had they invented the most ridiculous cover story imaginable because they believed no one could disprove it? Rumors and suspicions spread quickly. The crew members were the last known people to see Travis, and now Travis was nowhere to be found. A major search began in the forest. Law enforcement officers searched, volunteers searched, traffic dogs were used, aircraft were involved in the search efforts, but they did not find Travis. They did not find a body. They did not find a clear piece of evidence explaining what had happened to him. And finding nothing did not suddenly convince everybody that aliens must have taken him. If anything, it made the questions worse. Because now people were wondering, if the crew killed Travis, where did they put him? And with the men under suspicion, we arrive at one of the most famous and most misunderstood parts of the entire case. The polygraph examinations. 6 members of the logging crew underwent polygraph examinations. 5 of the results were reported as passing. 1 was considered inconclusive. The men were questioned about whether they had harmed Travis and whether they had witnessed the unusual event they described. Now, before anybody starts screaming, "They passed! Aliens confirmed!" No, that is not how this works. Polygraphs themselves are controversial. They are not magical machines that directly detect lies. They measure physical responses, and those results can be interpreted incorrectly. That is one of the reasons polygraph results are often limited or excluded in legal settings. So the 5 reported passing results do not prove that an extraterrestrial spacecraft was hovering in the forest. They do not scientifically prove that Travis was abducted. But considering these men were under suspicion in the disappearance of their coworker, I also understand why the results became such a massive part of the story. This is where people tend to go too far in both directions. Believers say they passed the test, case closed. Skeptics sometimes treat the results as though they mean absolutely nothing. I think the reasonable answer is somewhere in the middle. The tests were not proof of aliens, but 5 men producing results that were considered favorable while they were being questioned about a possible crime is still interesting. The full polygraph history is also more complicated than the simplified claim that everyone connected to the case passed every test. Travis himself was involved in separate examination. An early exam involving Travis reportedly produced an unfavorable result. Although supporters have disputed the circumstances and significance of that test, later examinations produced results considered favorable to him. So again, interesting. Yes. Definite proof? Absolutely no. And while everybody was debating what the polygraphs meant, something happened that completely changed the investigation. Several days after he disappeared, Travis came back. Around midnight, Travis's family receives a call. He was in the Heber area. He sounded weak, frightened, and distressed. Family members went to find him, and Travis was alive. According to the people who saw him, he appeared disoriented and deeply shaken. According to Walton, he did not initially understand how much time had passed. He believed a much shorter period had gone by. Imagine thinking you lost a few hours, and then finding out police, volunteers, dogs, aircraft have spent the last 5 days searching for your body. That realization alone would be terrifying. But Travis's return also created an entirely new set of questions. Where had he been? Why had the search failed to find him? What happened after the beam allegedly struck him? And this is where the story changes. Everything up to the beam and the crew fleeing was allegedly witnessed by the other men. What comes next comes from Travis himself. Travis claimed his next memory was waking up on his back on some kind of table. The room felt warm and humid. There was a heavy sensation in his chest, and at first he thought he might be in a hospital, which makes sense. The last thing he remembered was being struck by a beam and thrown backwards. Maybe he had been seriously injured. Maybe someone had found him. Maybe he was being treated. But as his vision cleared, he realized the figures standing over him were not doctors. Travis described 3 short, hairless beings. They had oversized heads and very large eyes. Travis apparently responded to the situation very differently than most people would, because he panicked. He jumped off the table, he grabbed a nearby object, and started swinging. Most people would freeze. Travis wakes up and sees 3 creatures standing over him and immediately grabs the nearest thing, like, absolutely not. Honestly, I respect the survival instinct. According to Travis, the beings backed away and left the room. Then he was able to go out into a hallway and enter another area. He described a chair and a strange display above him that looked like stars. Later, he claimed he encountered a human-looking figure wearing something like a helmet. Travis tried asking questions. Where was he? What was happening? Who was this person? But the figure didn't answer. Instead, Travis was led to another location where he was eventually encountered additional human-looking figures. A mask was eventually placed over his face. He lost consciousness, and his next memory was waking near Heber. He claimed he saw a craft above him before it disappeared into the sky. That is Travis Walton's account. And obviously, it is an insane story. But rather than deciding immediately that it must be true or it must be fake, I think it makes more sense to separate the strongest arguments supporting the story from the strongest arguments against it, because this case has both. The first major problem is the involvement of the National Enquirer. The tabloid became financially involved in promoting and examining the story. Money, publicity, and access to the case became connected. Now, the National Enquirer becoming involved does not automatically mean the entire story was fake, but does it make everything significantly messier? Absolutely. Once a tabloid is helping fund evaluations, promoting results, and turning the story into national entertainment, the line between investigation and publicity becomes very blurry. And when someone makes an extraordinary claim, credibility matters. The second major issue is the logging contract. Mike Rogers' crew was reportedly behind schedule on its Forest Service contract. Skeptics have suggested that the UFO incident could have created a convenient explanation for why the work was delayed. Essentially, we did not finish the job because something completely outside of our control happened. That does not prove the incident was staged. It is a proposed motive, but it is a detail worth considering. Because if you are evaluating a possible hoax, you have to ask whether the people involved had anything to gain. Then we return to the polygraphs. The tests connected to this case were not all performed under the same circumstances. Not every result was clean or favorable. Polygraphs themselves are disputed, and supporters and skeptics continue to interpret the results in completely different ways. So the polygraphs cannot carry the entire case. And the largest issue is still the lack of physical evidence proving extraterrestrial involvement. There is no physical object we can examine. There is no verified biological evidence. There is no recording of the crowd. The most extraordinary part of the story, what happened after Travis disappeared, depends mainly on his own account. That does not mean it did not happen, but it means we cannot independently confirm it. And this is where the case becomes so difficult. There are strange circumstances. There are multiple witnesses to the beginning. There is a real disappearance. But strange does not automatically mean extraterrestrial. And then, almost 20 years later, Hollywood got involved and made an already confusing story even more confusing. Travis published his first version of the story in a book, originally titled The Walton Experience. Then in 1993, his story was adapted into the movie Fire in the Sky. And if you've seen that movie, you probably remember one thing more than anything else: the abduction scene. It is horrifying. Travis is trapped inside a dark, organic-looking environment. He's restrained. He's covered with mucus membranes. There's needles. There's slime. There's screaming. It is a nightmare. That scene scarred an entire generation of people. There is just one very important problem. That is not what Travis Walton claimed happened. Walton described the environment as much cleaner and more clinical. The famous sequence in the movie was created for the film rather than taken directly from his account. And I think that distinction matters because there are probably millions of people whose entire understanding of this case comes from Fire in the Sky. And the scene they remember most clearly was heavily invented for entertainment. The movie version became more famous than the original acclaim. And this is why researching cases like this 50 years later becomes such a mess. Eventually, you are trying to figure out what the witnesses actually said, what a movie added, what later documentaries added, what the internet added, and what somebody's cousin Gary posted on Facebook. The entertainment version slowly buries the original story. So when we strip away the Hollywood slime, the tabloids, and decades of arguments, what are we actually left with? So after going through all of this, do I believe Travis Walton? Yeah, I do. I think something happened in that forest that night, and I genuinely believe Travis Walton was taken aboard some kind of a crowd. Now, does that mean I can prove it was extraterrestrial? No. Do the polygraphs prove it? No. And are there weird, messy parts of the story? Absolutely. The National Enquirer getting involved doesn't help. Logging contract gives skeptics a possible motive. And obviously we have no physical piece of a spacecraft sitting in a museum anywhere that we can point to and say, here it is. They're confirmed. But when I look at this case as a whole, I have a really hard time believing it was all made up. You have 6 men who reported witnessing the same central event. You have Travis genuinely disappearing for several days while people were actively searching for him. You have 5 crew members producing polygraph results that were reported as passing. And then you have the fact that this story has survived for 50 years. Could 6 people have agreed to fake the whole thing? Of course, people are capable of hoaxes. But this is where I personally struggle with that explanation, because it means these men would have had to create this absolutely insane story, tell it while their coworker is missing, deal with the police and being reported as witnesses and suspects and polygraphs, and somehow keep all of the story alive and cohesive. And for what? A logging contract? The National Enquirer? A movie that wouldn't even exist for almost another 20 years? I don't know. For me, the hoax explanation starts requiring almost as many leaps as the UFO explanation. And then there's Travis himself. I know people can lie. I know people can maintain lies for a very long time. But after everything I've read about this case, I believe that Travis Walton believes what he says happened to him. And personally, I think it did. I think those men saw something in the forest that night. I think Travis approached it. I think something happened that caused him to disappear. And yes, I think he was taken aboard some kind of a craft. Was it extraterrestrial? Was it something else entirely? I obviously cannot prove that. But if you're asking me whether I believe the entire thing was an elaborate hoax to get out of a logging contract, no, I don't. I believe Travis Walton. And honestly, that's exactly why this case fascinates me so much. Because 50 years later, with all the investigations, arguments, documentaries, skeptics, believers, books, and movies, nobody has been able to make this story go away. And maybe that's because somewhere underneath all of the noise, something really did happen out in those woods. So now I want to know where you land. Do you believe Travis and the crew? Do you think the entire thing was an elaborate hoax? Or do you think something else happened in that forest? Let me know in the comments because I genuinely want to know what you think. And if you want to keep digging into UFO encounters, cryptids, paranormal cases, and all the other stories that refuse to make sense, subscribe. There are a lot more weird stories we need to talk about. And until next time, stay strange.